Hi, let's continue our discussion on profit and loss problems. So in the previous video we saw that the general structure for a profit and loss problem is profit is a function of revenue and cost. Now if your profits are going down, you can have three scenarios. Either your revenues are going down, or your costs are going up, or it could be a mix of both, right? So what I mean by that is that the revenues are going up by a small amount, but the costs are going much up, or the revenues are declining by a great amount and the cost is also declining by a small amount. So in a relative sense, right, the revenue change is negative or the cost change is positive. That will cause a decline in profits. Okay, so we will just take two cases on the revenue as a revenue side problem and as a cost side problem. Okay, so first I'll discuss the cost side because the revenue side will be a longer discussion. So costs are relatively easy to break. You have costs into breaking down into variable cost and fixed cost, right? Now I have to give a small caveat here that sometimes when you have profit and loss problems, you find that your volumes are also changing, right? The number of units that you are selling, this might have an impact on the number of units you are producing also. So this can complicate the situation with the fixed cost, right? So don't get into all that discussion, right? You can just mention it to the interviewer that okay, so my fixed costs are going to change with my degree of production, right? But is that a factor I'm considering? In most cases fixed costs are not a problem, and if they are given, then they are given en masse, right? So usually you will focus on the variable cost. Now before we see how to figure them out, let's look at some of the components of the fixed cost. Okay, so you have rent, you have either you might have interest cost because of the debt that you have taken. Okay, you have administrative cost. Now here sometimes there's a confusion that what when you have to put the salary of the personnel, where do we put it? Where do we put in the fixed cost or variable cost? So usually it will depend on the case, right? Usually the cost of the management, the let's say the managers, the CEO, they are going to be part of the fixed cost, whereas the cost of the workers who are on the shop floor are going to be the variable cost, right? But again, these small points are something that you can clarify with the interviewer if you have a doubt. You must clarify, but you should not fret about these. Then you can have advertising and marketing costs, and then R&D costs, right? Just remember this list because sometimes in an interview you are just asked offhand, okay, so what could be the various fixed costs that we have, before the interviewer asks you to ignore them. Okay, so you should have some idea what fixed costs are. Okay, so this is a list. Now you could change the terminology according to the particular industry in your case, but it's going to largely remain this. All right, so fixed costs are taken care of. Now let's look at the variable cost. Okay, so in this you have the manufacturing element, right? Raw, which includes raw material, labor, fuel, the storage, it could be the storage, it could be the packaging. Okay, uh, raw material is something you should be very wary about, right? I usually now have started breaking down into a separate step altogether as the first step, and then comes manufacturing. Labor is important, fuel is important, packaging is extremely crucial. In so many cases that I've solved with people, people forget to include the packaging cost, right? They, let's say that if I'm selling let's say soap, right, it's never that you are selling a loose soap, right? It's essentially packed into something. While looking at the variable cost structure, people forget the packaging cost. So I want to re-emphasize, don't forget this. Okay, then on the distribution and the retailing side, you can have the cost of warehousing, you can have the transportation, you can have the trade cost. So the kind of discounts that you are giving, if not included in advertising and marketing cost, can be included here. And then finally you have the customer outreach. Okay, so the service cost, the repair cost, the replacement, the installation, all these elements. Okay, so I usually now, as I've discussed in the previous video, while looking at the variable cost, I make a process map: raw material, production, distribution, and then customer. Okay, this could be further broken down. So distribution could be two tiered. So you could have, let's say, distribution to wholesaler, and then distribution to retailer, and then you can have the customer step. Or if you have an e-commerce firm, it could be a different step altogether, right? So this is just a generic structure, right? You will make the process map and include the cost according to the industry that you have. In this case, what happens is sometimes people get stuck on where to start, right? Because if the industry is not known to them, then they're a little confused. So let's say if I talk about the KPO industry, you are given a case of cost cutting in the KPO industry, and you don't know the first thing about the KPO industry. What do? The simple solution is ask, right? A lot of people forget that the interview is essentially supposed to be collaborative, right? You are free to ask the interviewer, right, all the reasonable and logical questions that you have. Okay, the interviewer might decide to not answer them, but you are free to ask at least. So if there's this given an industry that you don't completely understand, right, it's always pertinent to ask what is the model. So you can ask for the entire cost model if you have no clue, right? Or it might be the case that you have some idea, but essentially the distribution model is unclear to you. So you can ask for that also. And specifically in terms of distribution, the way the competitive industries are today, right? A lot of companies have very innovative distribution models, right? They use all sorts of technique to cut down on their cost, or they can have innovative models when it comes to customer relations, right? So make sure that you don't make any assumption, right? If you are not 100% certain that you understand what the distribution model or the customer relation model is, ask for the model, then go for the cost cutting, right? Sometimes you might have to make two chains. One is that main chain, and once you figure out the distribution is problematic, right, all other costs are okay, it's the distribution variable cost which is problematic, then you can take out distribution separately, and after asking the model for it, make another process map there. All right, so make sure that all these costs are there with you. All right, so now what else? One cost that I want to include here that is not there in my structure, right? Specifically if you're talking about transportation, right, insurance cost is something that people tend to forget quite a bit. Okay, so whenever you are delivering something, right, even in your flights, there sometimes is an option that you can buy insurance, right? Or when you're transporting goods from point A to point B using a truck, right, you insure your goods. So the cost is also there for insurance. Okay, just remember that. Cool. So I think that's enough discussion on the cost side. You will understand this more by solving more cases, and just re-emphasizing, people use MISI on the cost side also. I usually prefer the process mapping because I feel it's the fastest method, as most of the variable costs are process oriented. You have a process involved, so why not solve it through a process mapping? All right, so this is done. Now let's look at the revenue side. Okay, so again, this is something that we have discussed in the previous video to some extent. Now let's have a more detailed discussion. On the revenue side, we said that essentially it's a function of number of units into the value, right? So dollar or the rupee sign. This is the rupee sign. Okay, this is the dollar. Okay. Now I like to include one more thing, which is variety. This is not something that usually I write explicitly, but I remember it in my head. So essentially I have revenue as function of three V's: variety, volume, and value, right? A lot of times people forget that a company might have more than one product offering. Okay, so it's always useful to ask that question upfront when you're looking at the revenue, that are we dealing with only one product or are we dealing with a variety of products. Okay, now the variety aspect will come in later also while we are structuring other parts of the problem. Okay, but for now remember this, don't assume that this is the only product. Ask, clarify, and get done with it. The language that I usually adopt is, okay, so is this the only product that we are concerned with, or are there other products also that we have to keep in mind? Once the interviewer gives me a go ahead, then I can only focus on this part, right? Like I said, variety can be of other aspects, right? It could be of business sale points, the POS, the points of sale. It could be a distribution channel. It could be of goods, which we will see in the segmentation. Okay. Now, once revenue is broken down into number of units into, let's use dollar for sake of ease. Now, number of units, as we have seen, is essentially market size into market share. Detailed discussion on market size and market share has been done in the market entry case videos, so just have a look at them if these concepts are not very clear to you. Let me just explain here for sake of continuity. Market size is essentially the total size of the pie. Okay, the total volume that is being sold in the market by all the players that are there. So that's the market size, and market share is just a percentage of that, okay, which corresponds to your client. Okay, so the total market size, 360-degree in this case, into the percentage, 25% is equal to 90%, essentially 90 degrees essentially in this case is what is your volume. Okay, this would be in the units term in the real case. So this is the breakup of volume. If your volumes are going down, it could be because the market as a whole is suffering, right? So the pie which was this is now reduced to this, whereas your share still remains to be 25%, right? But since the overall size of the pie has gone down, that's why your volumes have gone down, whereas this is fine. Or it could be the case that the size of the pie has remained the same, right? Your share has significantly reduced. So this is the same, this has gone down. So this breakup is useful because it helps you understand where the problem lies. Is it with your overall external environment, or is it with you, which is reflected in the market share? Okay. Uh, One point I would want to highlight here is that some of the problems what we have is that both the things are happening. So it might be the case that your client is facing a loss of 20%, right? Whereas the overall industry is facing a loss of 5%, right? Now, in this case, usually it is prudent to realize and also say it out loud. Now that you have two problems, two objectives that you're solving for. First, understanding why overall the industry is suffering, why overall industry is suffering, and second, why are you suffering more, right? So first I will look at this problem, why the -5 exists overall, and then why am I suffering the most, right? So make sure that you realize when your problem has bifurcated into two problems, okay? And this is a very usual case that you can encounter in a P&L problem. All right. So the discussion on market size and market share I think is sufficient here. You can look at more of it in the market entry video. Now we come to the segmentation. I began the P&L discussion by saying that it's an easier problem because essentially there is an issue and all I have to do is identify the issue, right? And on the revenue side, right, if my revenue is going down and I know that this is driven by the volume going down, all I have to do is figure out what segment of my volume is going down. If I am, let's say, selling 1 million units overall, right, in a span of 1 year, and now this has gone down to 900,000, right, there's definitely going to be one particular segment, right, which is going to get affected more than everyone else, right? It's going to be unlikely that through all the points of sale that you have, through all the geography that you have, through all the customer segments that you have, everyone has registered an equal dip to the tune of 90%, right? That's not going to happen, right? That's impractical, right? So you know, if there is a dip in your volumes, if there's a dip in your revenue, there is going to be at least one or perhaps even two or three sectors which are more problematic than the other sectors. So your job here is to figure out the most problematic, because as we have discussed elsewhere, 80-20 rule, we want to focus on the 80% of the problem. So if, let's say, my 1 million was I'm a multinational corporation and I serve Asia, Africa and Europe, and my order size used to be 400k, 300k, 200k. So, this also is 300k initially. This is initial. Finally, now when I'm down to 900,000, it is down to, let's say, 310, 290k, 300k, right? So this is 100,000, 1 million, this is 900,000, right? So now I see the maximum dip is in Asia. Africa also has seen a dip, but maximum dip is in Asia. So I'll first focus on this. Now if I had not divided my overall sales volume along geography, I might not have seen this kind of a split. If let's say I had divided according to channels, offline and online. Okay, let's do it in a cleaner fashion. One second. Right. So let's say I had divided into offline and online. Off, on, right? So initially the sales were 500k and 500k. Finally they were 450k, 450k, right? So doing this kind of division does not help me, whereas the geography split gave me a very good picture, right? So remember, segmentation is essentially breaking down your problem, looking at different sources of your volume, different type of customers, different type of channels, different segments that you have, and breaking your volumes along those lines. Okay, one of the segments will give you an answer, right? So if the offline online doesn't give you an answer, you don't have to worry. Okay, let's start looking at another kind of segmentation, in this case geography, and it gave you an answer. So if volumes are going down, just to reiterate, they are going to disproportionately have to be going down disproportionately in one of these segments. You have to creatively do different kind of segmentations to figure out which particular area is problematic. Don't lose hope if first segmentation does not give you an answer. You can also look at second and third level of segmentation, right? Sometimes if you have less time, you can simply ask the interviewer if they would like you to segment the problem in a particular way, though usually you will not get an affirmative answer for that. Okay, so this is about segmentation. Always remember, it's the heart of a PNL problem. Okay, now let's have a small discussion on the next point. Okay, so we have asked for the possible segmentation. Now sometimes knowing the segmentation is not enough. Okay, you have to do two critical comparisons. Okay, so like in this case, before I go further, so one is with your own history, second is with market. Okay, so in this case, we discussed the previous cases we discussed, we were doing it with our own history, right? So usually your problem repeating it, XYZ facing X% loss for Y time frame, right? So Y time frame is crucial. If you ask for my volume split as it exists today, right, it is not useful. You have to also understand the volume split as it occurred, or as it existed y time period before the present, when the problem started emerging, right? And see if there's a deviation between the kind of volume split I have today with my own history y time ago. Okay, so if there's a deviation, then you know, okay, my problem is going to be driven by this. So in this case, like we saw, the initial and final when done through geography had a difference, and that gave me a clear indication that aha, I have come up with something which is a deviation, and this will help me out. Whereas when I did it with offline online, the comparison with our own history, it did not give me any result. So compare own history through different segments that you have, which could be points of sale as in offline online, distribution channels offline online, type of customer segments, the geography. Okay, and this is not an exhaustive list. You can divide it the way you feel comfortable and according to the context of the problem. Okay, So that's first kind of critical comparison. The second kind of critical comparison is with the market. Okay, so I figured that, let me just clear some space. So let's say I have a problem that I have two product lines, okay, A and B. Okay, so you can understand this in play if you look at example that I've already posted about an electronics manufacturer whose profits are declining. Okay, you can find it on my YouTube channel. It covers this critical comparison part really well, and also all the other aspects of profit and loss problem. Okay, so we have two products A and B. A and B correspond to 80% of our volume. A is 80%, B is 20%. This is us. And for the competitor, now if I just ask for our mix, it does not tell me anything at all. We know we are making a loss. Our competitor has the exact opposite. They are very profitable, right? So by looking at 80-20 and knowing that I am at a loss, I have no new knowledge. But by comparing these segments of my competitor, I now have a lot of information that everything else remaining same, this difference in the mix of product line, the contribution that the product line have to my total volume, might be the reason for them being profitable and us being in loss. So remember these two critical comparisons, one with our own history and the second with the competitor. Okay. So like I like to put it, and figure out points of deviation. So if they also had 80 and 20 here, then there was no useful information. I would perhaps segment my problem some other way. Instead of A and B, I might go for a geography segment, and I would ask for the same segmentation of geography for my competitor and figure if there is a existence of a deviation there, then that might explain this. Okay, so points of deviation are points of solution. This is extremely important. Do remember this. Okay, so this covers most of the discussion that I wanted to have about the revenue and the cost side of the problem. You can understand all of this better by looking at the electronics manufacturer problem that I have on my channel. So I hope this discussion helps you. We will have two more videos on the profit and loss discussion. One will be about the preliminary questions, and I've added another one which is about figuring out the difference between us and a competitor. Okay, so best of luck, and I hope this video was useful. Thank you. Do check out other videos also on the channel for your case prep.